My parents persuaded my husband that he deserved better. They all ceased communication with me when I couldn't conceive after 3 years. They were astonished to see me with a daughter. I am 30 years old. Recently, I encountered my parents and my ex-husband, Clifford, who is 33 years old, and I still don't know how to process it. For context, we hadn't spoken for almost 3 years. The same goes for my ex-husband. We divorced 3 years ago and hadn't had any contact since. Moreover, I did everything to avoid seeing them again because they had practically ruined my life and mental health to the point where I felt unworthy of existing. After the divorce, I moved to the suburbs and tried to build a new life away from everything connected to my past. So, the recent encounter with them was a real shock for me. I said some things to them, and now I'm uncertain if it was the right decision. My parents always wanted a son, and although you couldn't say they treated me badly in my childhood, it was obvious to me that if I had been a boy, they would have treated me differently. My mother even mentioned this a few times, and I tried my best to be the son they never had, but I couldn't do it. After finishing college and starting an independent life, I attempted to maintain a connection with my parents because, no matter what, they were still my family, the only family I had. I wasn't particularly close with my grandparents, and I didn't have aunts or uncles who could support me. So, I resigned myself to the idea that, no matter how much they pushed me away, my only family was them, even if they didn't show much interest in communicating with me. I tried to keep in touch. When I was about 23 years old, I started dating Clifford. We met at a concert, and there was an immediate spark between us. After 6 months of dating, I introduced him to my parents. It was then that my parents began to make more effort to communicate with me. They started calling more often, asking about my relationships, and generally showing more interest in my life. I noticed these changes, but since they were pleasant for me, I didn't question the reason and just accepted them. The longer I dated Clifford, the more my parents became a part of my life, and at some point, it seemed to me that we all became one big happy family. I was very happy because I had always wanted this, so I didn't ask too many questions, though perhaps I should have. After 2 years of dating, we got engaged, and after 3 years of living together, we got married. After the wedding, everything was wonderful, and I enjoyed family life. But after 6 months, my parents began to hint that they wanted grandchildren. I was only 26 and wasn't ready for that. I wanted to wait a couple of years before thinking about children. But under their pressure, I discussed it with Clifford, and he enthusiastically supported their idea. So, because of his enthusiasm, we decided to start trying to have a baby almost immediately after the wedding. We tried for quite a long time, but even after several months, nothing happened. We began to suspect that something might be wrong and decided to get tested. Unfortunately, it turned out that I was infertile. This was a huge shock for both of us, but even more so for my parents, who didn't even try to hide their disappointment. On the day we told both our families, my father just left instead of supporting me. We decided to take a break and stop trying for a while. Clifford and I discussed the possibility of trying other methods, such as IVF, but it would have cost us a lot of money, and success on the first try wasn't guaranteed. So, we had to postpone our plans to start a family until we could save enough money for several IVF cycles. We came to terms with this decision, although we were a bit upset. But my parents were extremely unhappy. They stopped coming over, stopped talking to me, and no matter how much I tried to explain that it wasn't entirely my fault, they just didn't want to listen. After a few weeks, I felt so depressed by their behavior that I called them and told them everything I thought. I said they were being too harsh on me just because I couldn't give them a grandchild yet, and it made me doubt whether they would be good grandparents if I ever could have a child. I told them they had treated me harshly all my life just because I wasn't a boy, and I could clearly see how differently they treated my husband. I tried to ignore all this and maintain our relationship, but now I no longer want to keep in touch with them and would be grateful if they left me alone forever. It was very difficult for me to do this because, for many years, I had only dreamed of their approval, but now I realized that it was impossible. However, instead of apologizing, they only worsened their behavior and were completely in agreement that I should no longer communicate with them because, in their opinion, I was a worthless woman if I couldn't have children, and they didn't want to have anything to do with me. It was painful to hear that, but at least I understood where I stood in their eyes. After that conversation, I stopped communicating with my parents, and our relationship was over. When I told Clifford about the call, he initially showed sympathy. But after a few days, I began to notice that his attitude towards me was changing. At first, I ignored it because I was going through a very difficult period emotionally and didn't want to admit even to myself that maybe my husband was going to leave me. I pretended that nothing was happening and that everything was fine. But after a few months, he became a completely different person and was always cold toward me. I did everything I could to save our relationship, but it didn't help because, after a month, he came home with divorce papers and said that was enough for him. I can't say it was a shock, but I still tried to reason with him, saying that we could always try to have a child later. However, he replied that there were many reasons for him to leave, but he didn't want to go into details. He wanted to finish everything as soon as possible because it was hard for both of us. The divorce process took almost 7 months, and it was the hardest time in my life. I was left alone and completely devastated. Moreover, a couple of weeks after Clifford announced his intention to divorce and moved out, I learned from several relatives that he was apparently now living with my parents. I knew it was useless to turn to them for help, so I decided to talk to his parents. This conversation was extremely unpleasant, but they told me that my parents had apparently been in contact with Clifford for several months and had possibly even turned him against me. That's why he decided to leave me, although his parents thought it was a bad idea. But Clifford had a fight with them and stopped communicating. I don't know all the details of what exactly my parents told Clifford, but I remember his parents saying that Clifford hinted that my own parents told him he deserved better. I still don't know exactly what they said to him, but apparently they were so eager to have the son they never got that they decided to treat Clifford as their own and slowly pulled him into their circle. They convinced him that he could have a better life, one with someone who could give him what I could not. After the divorce, I was completely crushed. It took me several months just to get out of bed and convince myself that there was any point to moving forward. But eventually, I did. I moved farther out of the city, got a new job, cut my hair short, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the courage to, and created an entirely new version of myself. I deleted all my old social media accounts and created new ones with only a few carefully chosen people. I told the friends I stayed in touch with that I didn't want to hear anything about Clifford or my parents. If anyone mentioned them, I'd walk away from the conversation. For 3 years, I kept this boundary firmly in place. I went to therapy weekly, focused on my career, and, slowly, started to feel peace. The only thing that still lived quietly in the corners of my heart was the desire to become a mother. It had never gone away, even when I had been told I was infertile. I knew adoption was an option, and I considered it. But something inside me wasn't ready to give up on trying, and a part of me believed I could still experience pregnancy, even if it seemed unlikely. Last year, I decided to pursue IVF on my own. I used my savings, applied for a medical grant that thankfully went through, and I started the process with no expectations, just hope. To my absolute astonishment, the procedure was successful. I was pregnant. I cried alone in my bathroom when I saw the result. Not because I was sad, but because after everything, after being made to feel less than, unworthy, incapable, I had done this. Not for anyone else. For me. My pregnancy wasn't easy, but I managed well. I prepared everything on my own, found a lovely older woman from the local church to help with childcare once the baby arrived, and continued therapy to navigate the swirl of feelings I had about becoming a mother after everything I'd been through. My daughter, Etta, was born in the early fall. She was tiny and perfect, and holding her for the first time made me realize that I didn't need anyone else to complete my story. It was around the time Etta turned 6 months old that something unexpected happened. One cool spring morning, I was walking back from the grocery store when I saw 2 people exiting a house a few blocks from mine. I recognized them immediately, and my breath caught in my throat. It was my parents, and behind them, Clifford. I froze. At first, I thought they were looking for me, but then I realized they were visiting someone in the neighborhood. Still, the timing felt surreal. When they saw me, they stopped in their tracks. My father raised his hand in a hesitant wave. My mother tilted her head like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Clifford looked stunned. They approached me, slowly, like someone trying not to scare off a startled animal. They asked about the baby, apparently assuming I was still infertile, and I answered honestly, though with little emotion. I told them I had gone through IVF on my own. Their eyes widened, and I saw something in their expressions that unsettled me. It wasn't exactly joy or pride. It was interest. Before I could walk away, Clifford asked me to wait. He said he had been thinking a lot about me lately. He explained that the house they were visiting belonged to his aunt, who had just moved into the neighborhood, and he had taken running into me as a sign from the universe that he needed to try to make amends. I said nothing. Then my mother stepped in, suggesting we should all sit down and talk, that they'd clearly missed a lot and wanted to be part of my life again. That was when something inside me snapped. I told them plainly that I would rather invite in a group of complete strangers than welcome them into my home. At least strangers hadn't betrayed me. I said they were only interested in me now because I had a child, because I could now offer them the grandchild they once deemed me too broken to give. Clifford, I said, only showed up because he had failed to find someone else, and now that I had proven myself capable of getting pregnant, he saw an opportunity to return to the life he once abandoned. They looked shocked, but I didn't stop. I told them I wasn't a machine built to produce children. I was a human being with thoughts, feelings, and memories, and they had hurt me deeply. My voice cracked, and for the first time in years, I let the tears fall in public. I walked home, locked the door, and held Etta for a long time. The days after that were difficult. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, wondering if I should have said less, or more. I took time off work and stayed home with Etta. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not even my therapist at first. I needed to sit with the emotions myself. Then, one night, a week after the encounter, I received a phone call from an unknown number. Normally, I don't answer those, but something told me I should pick up. It was Clifford. His voice sounded unsure, but I also heard something else in the background, my parents. I could make out their whispers. They weren't even trying to be subtle. They wanted me to hear them. I stayed calm. I told Clifford not to call me again and warned him that if he or my parents tried to contact me in any way, I would take steps to ensure it never happened again. I said the only reason I answered was to make my position clear. But he pleaded with me to hear him out. Against my better judgment, I let him speak. He said he regretted everything, that he had been overwhelmed by disappointment at the time, just like my parents. He admitted that they had pressured him, told him he could find someone else, someone better equipped for family life. He said he had believed them, but now, after everything, he realized what he had lost. I wanted to hang up, but I waited. Then my parents joined the call and said something that chilled me. They claimed that my behavior during that time was selfish. That when I learned I was infertile, I imposed my sadness on them, and they didn't know how to respond. According to them, they needed space to process the loss of a grandchild they had assumed was coming, and when I kept trying to involve them, it was too much. They acted like I had driven them away. I didn't respond. I just hung up. And in that moment, I realized they were trying to rewrite the story. They were trying to gaslight me. After I hung up the phone, I sat in silence for a long time. My daughter was asleep in the next room, the soft buzz of her nightlight filling the hallway. I was no longer shaking with anger like I had been on the street that day, but I wasn't calm either. I was numb. The truth is, I had spent the last few years convincing myself I had moved on, that I had healed. But that call reminded me that some wounds may scab over, yet they never truly disappear when the people who inflicted them refuse to acknowledge what they did. I began thinking again about Clifford's closeness with my parents, how they had bonded, how they turned him against me. It had never fully made sense to me, even though his actions said everything. I still had questions. And I hated that I did. After a couple days of internal debate, I decided to reach out to his parents. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since the divorce. The last time I saw them, I was a shell of myself, quiet, devastated, withdrawn. I wasn't sure how they would respond, but I sent a message asking for a call. They replied quickly and agreed. The conversation began awkwardly, as I expected. But they were surprisingly warm. After a few minutes of catching up, I asked the question that had been bothering me: why did Clifford grow so close to my parents, even after everything? And how long had they been influencing him behind my back? There was a pause before his father spoke. Apparently, it had started early, much earlier than I ever realized. Even while we were dating, my parents had begun forming a bond with Clifford. They would invite him to dinner when I wasn't around. At first, he thought nothing of it. He believed they saw him as family, and in his mind, it was a compliment. He told his own parents that he felt proud to have impressed them. But slowly, according to them, the relationship took on a different shape. My parents began giving him things, expensive gifts, help with finances, and eventually, checks. They encouraged his goals and praised his every decision. He interpreted it as acceptance and love. I now see it for what it really was, grooming. It turns out the money Clifford once said he had figured out for our IVF plans had come from my parents. He hadn't told me the source because he knew I wouldn't approve. I never felt comfortable with taking shortcuts, and I definitely wouldn't have accepted money from my parents, not without full honesty. But that wasn't all. According to his parents, my own family had been quietly undermining me the entire time. Subtle remarks about how emotional I was, how stubborn I could be, how I didn't trust Clifford enough. They slowly planted seeds of doubt in him, manipulating his insecurities while propping themselves up as the supportive figures in his life. Eventually, Clifford stopped confiding in his own parents altogether and turned to mine instead. They became his chosen family. By the time our marriage began to show cracks, after the infertility diagnosis, after our failed attempts at trying for a child, he had already internalized their belief that he could do better, that I was the one holding him back. Hearing all of this didn't make me feel better. But it gave me something I hadn't had for years, clarity. Clifford didn't leave because I was broken. He left because he allowed himself to be drawn into their vision of what his life should be. He chose them. And that hurt. But it also freed me. I thanked his parents for their honesty. They said they no longer supported Clifford's choices and hadn't been in regular contact with him since the incident with my parents. They told me, quietly, that they wished he had chosen differently. Update 1. Not long after that conversation, I began to settle into a new kind of peace. I continued going to therapy, took time off work to focus on Etta, and started planning how I wanted to shape the next few years of my life. I knew I still needed time to recover fully from everything that had happened, but at least I no longer felt lost in the fog of confusion. Then, just when things felt steady again, something happened that shook me to my core. It was a Tuesday morning. I had returned to work a few weeks prior, and Etta was at home with our nanny, Francine, a retired preschool teacher with a calm voice and decades of experience. I trusted her completely. That day, I was between meetings when my phone rang. It was Francine. Her voice was calm but urgent. She told me that Clifford had appeared at the front of the house, yelling my name. When she didn't answer the door, he began pounding on it, hard, and shouting that he needed to speak with me. Francine said she didn't feel safe staying in the house, so she had taken Etta out the back gate and walked to her own house, which was only a short distance away. She wanted to let me know that Etta was safe, but that I should call the police. I was already in my car before she finished. When I arrived, a police cruiser was already outside. Clifford was clearly intoxicated. It was barely noon. He was slurring his words, agitated, and disheveled. My front door bore several deep marks from where he'd hit it with his fist or possibly something harder. I had installed a basic security system after Etta was born, and everything was recorded. The footage was clear. I didn't hesitate. I filed a formal complaint and requested a restraining order that same day. The officers led Clifford away, and I stood at my front step watching the cruiser pull off into the distance. I didn't cry. I didn't feel fear. I just felt tired. Francine returned shortly after, Etta bundled safely in her arms. I thanked her 1,000 times. She insisted she was just doing what any responsible caretaker would, but I knew she had gone above and beyond. I gave her the rest of the day off and spent the afternoon holding my daughter, reminding myself that we were safe. That night, as I sat on the edge of my bed, I thought again about how far I had come, and how hard some people try to drag you backward when they see that you found a way forward. Clifford showing up like that wasn't about love or closure. It was desperation. And I had no intention of letting it derail me. Update 2. In the days following Clifford's visit and the police report, I took a few additional steps. First, I had the locks changed and upgraded my home security system. Then, I met with a legal advisor to finalize the restraining order. The video evidence made everything clear and straightforward, and the judge approved it without hesitation. Clifford was officially banned from coming near me or my daughter. The relief I felt afterward was quiet but powerful. I also made the decision to take a few more days off work. I wanted to spend that time with Etta, not just to calm my nerves, but because I realized how fleeting these early months are. After everything I'd been through, every second with her felt like a small, sacred victory. Francine and I had a long talk as well. I offered to raise her pay, she refused. She said her job wasn't just about work, she truly cared for Etta, and by extension, for me too. Her kindness humbled me. It reminded me that not all people are capable of cruelty or selfishness. Some show up because it's the right thing to do, no strings attached. It was around this time that I heard from Clifford's parents again. They had seen the incident on the news, local channels had picked up a report of a domestic complaint involving a former spouse, and though names weren't included, they figured out the details from the location and timing. They called to let me know that they had spoken with Clifford and informed him they would no longer be a part of his life unless he sought help and stayed away from me. Apparently, things had not gone well for him since our divorce. After moving in with my parents, he began to isolate himself. His personal relationships fell apart, and his attempts to start another family never took root. I was told he had tried dating, but it seemed none of the relationships lasted. He had even brought up adoption at one point but dismissed it almost immediately, saying it wasn't the same. Perhaps that was part of what led him to show up at my home in that state. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was entitlement. But either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. My parents, from what little I could gather, had begun to keep their distance since the incident. Whether it was out of guilt, shame, or fear of legal consequences, I don't know. But I hadn't heard from them, and I didn't plan to. That chapter was closed. What stunned me most, however, was what Clifford's mother shared at the end of our call. She said that, before our divorce, Clifford had once told her something she couldn't stop thinking about, that my parents made him feel more valued than he ever had. That they praised him, supported him, and respected his opinions, more than anyone else. Including me. She had asked him then, but did they really love you? Or did they just see you as something they wanted to mold? He didn't answer. Now, after everything, she believed the answer was clear. Update 3. It's been a few weeks since then, and life has become, well, quiet again. The kind of quiet I used to find unnerving, but now find comforting. I've poured my energy into caring for Etta, working on a new side project I had dreamed about for years but never had the time, or clarity, to start. I've reconnected with a few trusted friends and found joy in small, ordinary moments, planting flowers on the porch, reading during Etta's nap time, taking long walks when the weather allows. I did receive word from a distant cousin that my parents have been trying to clarify the narrative to the rest of the family. Apparently, they're painting themselves as victims, saying I cut them off unfairly and that they were only trying to help Clifford during a difficult time. But it's not working. Too many people saw how they treated me. Too many heard the hurt in my voice when I tried, time and again, to hold our family together. Their version of the story doesn't hold water anymore. I've come to accept that they will never fully admit what they did. They will never apologize in the way I once hoped they would. And that's okay. Because their apology isn't what I need anymore. What I needed was freedom. And I have it. They will never meet their granddaughter. That's a boundary I will never budge on. Not because I want revenge, but because I want protection, for Etta, for myself, and for the life I've built from the ashes of their choices. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the girl I used to be, the one who begged for her parents' approval, who clung to a marriage that was already slipping through her fingers, who thought she had to earn love by being enough. I want to hug that version of me. I want to tell her that she didn't fail. She simply outgrew people who never truly saw her. And she became a mother, a protector, a woman who didn't just survive heartbreak, she rewrote the ending. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.